The rise and fall of Rome. In the hush of prehistory, beneath a sky that had not yet learned the shape of empire, a she-wolf howled. Twin cries echoed in the forest. Romulus and Remus, sons of Mars, born of a vestal's shame and a god's hunger, washed ashore in the reeds of destiny. The Tiber cradled them. The she-wolf suckled them. The wild raised them, not with tenderness, but with teeth. From this savage cradle, empire stirred. They wrestled for the dream of a city not yet born. And in blood, it was decided. Remus fell. Romulus built. Stone upon stone, ambition found its voice. Rome rose not as a home, but as a hunger. A beast cloaked in brick and myth. Not born. Summoned. A city whispered into the ears of war gods. A name carved into the wind by fratricide. Rome. She did not crawl. She charged. Her infancy was war. Her lullaby, steel. From monarchy's ashes came the cry of liberty. The kings were cast down. The people, or those who spoke for them, forged the republic. Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and the people of Rome. Not all had voices. But all bore its weight. Rome was a chorus of ambition, led in marble and sweat. Tribunes clashed with patricians. Law danced with power. The 12 tables were etched not only in bronze, but in blood. Still, the city grew. Her armies marched, not with joy, but with inevitability. Each province taken became a mirror and a scar. The Samnites resisted. The Etruscans remembered. The Gauls broke her walls once, but not again. Rome learned. And when she learned, she devoured. She was still young. But already, she had teeth. Beyond the hills of Latium, the world awaited. Rome turned her eyes to the horizon and found it wanting. Carthage stood defiant across the sea, proud, wealthy, and ancient. And so began the Punic Wars. 3 storms, 3 wars. Hannibal crossed the Alps with beasts of burden and vengeance. He brought elephants, yes, but also ghosts. At Cannae, he unmade legions. Yet even he could not unmake Rome's resolve. For every defeat, she sent more sons. For every river of Roman blood, she paved new roads of retribution. Carthage fell. Salted. Cursed. Forgotten. Then came Greece, cradle of wisdom, now cradled by conquest. Rome took her gods, her statues, her language, and called it tribute. She became the world. Not in geography, but in mind. Greatness is a coin. One side power, the other pride. Julius Caesar held both. A general, adored by troops, feared by senators. He crossed the Rubicon not as a rebel, but as an omen. Aelii acta est, he whispered. The die is cast. Rome had long feared kings. But Caesar offered crowns not on his brow, but in his breath. A dictator in all but name. A savior in his own eyes. He reformed. He rebuilt. He reimagined. And so they killed him. On the Ides of March, beneath Pompey's theatre, the knives spoke louder than words. Et tu, brute. No gods wept that day. Only the Republic. But it was too late. In killing Caesar, they carved the road for emperors. And Caesar's name would become more than a man. It would become an age. Caesar. Kaiser. Tsar. Echoes through history. Rome would never be a republic again. Augustus rose not from ambition, but from aftermath. Where Caesar fell, Octavian gathered the scattered bones of a broken order and wove them into something new, an empire crowned in peace, veiled in power. He did not seize the throne. He breathed it into being. Princeps. First citizen. He wore modesty like a mask, while the Senate bowed beneath it. Under Augustus, marble replaced mud. Laws were carved. Roads were drawn. Temples rose like prayers. The Pax Romana began not as absence of war, but as silence imposed. And for a time, Rome glowed. Trade flowed from the east like whispered wealth. Legions marched not to conquer, but to keep. The empire stretched, not with the lash, but with the law. But the shadow lengthens with the sun. The seed of decline is sown at the summit. And power, once taken, is never satisfied. The throne hardened. The crown grew heavy. What Augustus built in vision, others would fracture in vanity. The age of emperors ripened into excess. Tiberius ruled from shadows, drunk on suspicion. Caligula, madness made flesh, named his horse a consul. Rome, once led by heroes, now whimpered under tyrants. Nero lit the night with flame and fiddle. He watched Rome burn and blamed the innocent. Power bred cruelty. Pleasure blurred into perversion. The empire began to choke on its own gold. The Senate, once mighty, now bowed to whims. Legions sold loyalty to the highest bidder. And the people? Bread and circuses. Appeased but not inspired. Fed but not led. Still, Rome endured. For now. But beneath her marble mask, cracks formed. Not from enemies beyond, but rot within. The center trembled. And the edges burned. The empire, too vast to hold, strained beneath its own glory. Borders bled. The Rhine and Danube, once Rome's spine, now bent beneath barbarian waves. The Goths, the Franks, the Vandals, they were not monsters. They were hunger and memory, pushed to the margins. Legions that once marched in pride now fled in dust. Rome no longer conquered. Rome begged. Emperors rose and fell like the turning of a coin. Some ruled days. Others, not at all. Civil war became ritual. Brother against brother, general against general. Even the air changed. Where once there was law, now lingered bribes. Where once there was vision, now festered fear. Taxes strangled farmers. Gold fled eastward. And in the west, only shadows. The eternal city began to forget herself. Not in one great catastrophe, but in the quiet decay of certainty. Rome's fall did not sound like thunder. It whispered. In the year 476, a boy named Romulus, like the first, but not the founder, was stripped of his crown. The last emperor of the West was dethroned by a barbarian who wore no laurel, only hunger. There was no final battle. No last stand beneath the eagles. Just a hush. A silence that swept through the forum, through the Senate halls, through the hearts of men who had once called themselves gods. The Western Empire fell, not with fire, but with forgetting. And yet, Rome did not die. She fractured. She faded. She became myth. In Constantinople, her echo lingered for centuries. In marble ruins, her bones still speak. And in every law, every road, every language that bears her shadow, Rome endures. Not as empire, but as ghost. Not as ruler, but as memory. We walk where she walked. We fall as she fell. We dream as she dared. Ashes do not vanish. They settle. They whisper. And Rome, she whispers still.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling, well, one of history's truly epic stories, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire.
It's a huge topic, definitely.
Huge! And we've dug into our sources, and honestly, there are some genuinely surprising things to unpack about how this incredible power emerged, how it held on to its dominance for so long, and what eventually led to its quiet fading.
Yeah, it's not always the dramatic story you might expect, especially the ending.
Right. So our mission today is to take you on this journey, this deep dive, through Rome's whole trajectory. We're starting right at the beginning, those mythic origins.
The she-wolf, the twins.
Exactly. All the way through its conquests, its internal struggles, the glory days, and then finally tracing that slow decline right down to the legacy it still leaves us with. We want to pull out the key insights, the facts that maybe shift your perspective a bit on what an empire even is.
And to do that properly, you really have to start where Rome itself started, in that savage cradle, as the source puts it.
Okay, let's dive in there. The origin story, it's pretty intense.
It really is.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating looking at the sources is how this story isn't just, a nice tale they told. It's almost like a prophecy, isn't it? A kind of blueprint for Rome's entire character.
How so?
Well, it immediately sets the stage for everything that follows. The ruthlessness, right from the start with the fratricide. The ambition, this hunger to build something. And that incredible, almost stubborn resilience.
Built to survive.
Exactly. From these very first moments, the material we've looked at makes it pretty clear. Rome was always going to be a force to reckon with. It was practically baked into its DNA.
So let's paint that picture. Imagine, way back, before cities, before empire as we know it, there's this wild landscape by the Tiber River.
Yeah.
A she-wolf howls.
Primal stuff.
Totally primal. And then these two cries, these twin infants, Romulus and Remus, sons of Mars, the war god no less, born of a Vestal virgin's shame and a god's desire, abandoned, washed ashore.
Saved by the river, ironically.
Right. The Tiber cradles them. The she-wolf feeds them. Nature raises them. But it's not gentle. It's, as the source says, not with tenderness, but with teeth.
It strips away any kind of romantic notion of peaceful beginnings, doesn't it? This isn't about settlers finding a nice spot. It's raw survival, instinct, power asserting itself from day one.
And that struggle continues immediately between the brothers themselves. They're not just brothers, they're rivals for this dream, this city that doesn't even exist yet.
And it's not a friendly rivalry.
No way, our sources are blunt. In blood, it was decided. Remus falls, Romulus builds.
That foundational violence is key.
Stone upon stone, ambition starts to take shape, Rome rises. But the source makes a point. It's not rising as a home, not really. It's rising as a hunger. A beast almost, cloaked in brick and myth.
Not born, summoned.
Yeah, I love that phrasing. Summoned, whispered into the ears of war gods. Its name carved by fratricide. Rome. It didn't crawl into being. It charged. Its infancy was war. Its lullaby, steel.
And that narrative, that founding violence, it's not just drama. It establishes this deep, intrinsic link between Rome and conflict, conquest.
It's who they are from the start.
It implies this willingness, doesn't it, to sacrifice absolutely anything, even family, for this city, for its dominance. And that ruthlessness that becomes a defining feature right through their history. It shapes their military, their politics, everything. It's the template.
That foundational violence really does set the tone. But okay, even as it's born in blood and myth, Rome starts to evolve internally, right? It doesn't stay a monarchy forever. We get this shift. This cry for liberty.
Absolutely. And that transition from monarchy to the republic is, well, it's crucial. It introduces this incredibly complex power dynamic that shapes Roman politics for centuries.
How did that happen? They just kicked out the king.
Pretty much. Our sources talk about the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud. His rule became tyrannical, and things really boiled over after an incident involving his son. So yeah, the kings were cast down, and from those ashes, you get this cry of liberty. The people, or let's be honest, the powerful families who spoke for the people, they forged the republic.
And they give it that iconic name.
Senatus Populus Romanus, SPQR. The Senate and the people of Rome. Has a ring to it, doesn't it?
It does. But our sources suggest this wasn't suddenly some perfect democracy, right? It still had a sharp edge.
Oh, definitely not. Not everyone had a voice, not by a long shot, especially early on. Yeah. But everyone, in some way, bore the weight of this new republic. Rome was this kind of chorus of ambition layered in marble and sweat, as one source puts it. You had constant friction.
Like who?
Tribunes representing the common people, the plebeians clashing constantly with the patricians, the old aristocratic families who dominated the Senate. Law was always sort of dancing with power, often precariously.
So internal conflict was just normal.
Pretty much baked in. And it's important to get the structure right. It wasn't a democracy like we think of it. It was more of an oligarchy, really. The wealthy families in the Senate held most of the cards, controlling government, religion, the lot.
But the common people, the plebeians, they pushed back.
They did. Over time, they gained real power through their elected officials, the tribunes of the plebes. And these tribunes had this incredible power. The veto, literally, I forbid. They could block senatorial actions. And the tribunes themselves were considered sacrosanct. You couldn't touch them.
Wow. Okay, so that creates real tension.
Exactly. A system constantly wrestling between aristocratic privilege and popular demands. But that tension, that friction, it actually drove innovation.
In law, politics, even military stuff.
And the law itself, the 12 tables. Our source says they were etched not just in bronze, but in blood.
Yeah, that signifies the struggle, doesn't it? Establishing that foundational legal code wasn't easy. It took fierce conflict to get there and keep it. It became part of their identity, but born from that internal fight. It does make you wonder, though, how did a society with so much internal fighting project such incredible power outwards? All that clashing, the constant negotiation, seems like it should have made them unstable.
And it did, sometimes. There were definitely periods of intense instability. But paradoxically, that internal tension also bred resilience, innovation. They were always tweaking their systems, their laws, their army, often precisely because of these internal pressures and, of course, external threats.
Adapting to survive.
Constantly. That blood in the 12 tables really hints at the fierce battles just to get that basic framework down. It became fundamental, but yeah, born from conflict. That internal adaptability was absolutely key.
And while all this internal drama is unfolding, Rome keeps growing outwards. The armies are marching, the source says, not with joy, but with inevitability. Chilling.
It suggests this relentless drive, doesn't it? Almost like destiny.
Yeah. And each place they take becomes like a mirror for their own power, but also a scar, a reminder of the fight. The Samnites fought back hard. The Etruscans remembered being independent. And the Gauls, they actually broke Rome's walls once.
A huge shock to the system that was. Around 390 BC, they sacked Rome.
But the source says, but not again.
Exactly. That trauma didn't break them, it forged them. It led to massive military reforms, this constant state of vigilance, this absolute determination that defined their later expansion. They learned, and crucially, they learned from defeat.
So they didn't just conquer, they absorbed lessons.
Absolutely. They took technologies, tactics, even cultural bits from the people they fought. It made them stronger. It's this adaptive hunger that really sets them apart. They were young, but man, they already had teeth. They were constantly refining their discipline, their organization, that famous Roman will.
So it wasn't just brute force, it was smart expansion, learning on the job.
Very much so. That ability to adapt, born from necessity and sheer drive, let them overcome setbacks and build this incredibly effective military machine.
Okay, so they're adapting, learning, growing stronger internally and externally. They've handled local rivals. What happens when they start looking further afield?
Well, they solidify things at home, build this powerful base, and then, yeah, they turn their eyes beyond Italy. Beyond the hills of Latium, as the source says, the world awaited, and Rome found it. Wanting.
You mean?
Meaning they wanted it. Their ambition wasn't contained anymore. And looking across the sea, there's Carthage. Defiant, proud, wealthy, ancient. A real rival power.
The other big player in the Mediterranean.
Exactly. And so begins one of history's truly epic conflicts, the Punic Wars.
Right, not just one war, but three.
3 storms, 3 wars, the source calls them. And each one was just brutal, existential, really. This wasn't just another border dispute. This was for total supremacy.
Yeah.
The whole Mediterranean was the prize.
And it pushed Rome to its limits, didn't it? Like having to build a navy?
Absolutely. In the First Punic War, Rome was mainly a land power. Carthage ruled the waves. So Rome basically had to build a fleet from scratch. It shows that incredible adaptability again, that rapid innovation when facing a challenge.
And then there's Hannibal, the name everyone knows.
The boogeyman of Roman history for a long time, crossing the Alps, not just with supplies, but with vengeance, as you said earlier, and elephants, of course.
But also ghosts, the source said. What do you think that means?
It's evocative, isn't it? Maybe the ghosts of past Carthaginian defeats, or just the sheer weight of history and pride he carried. But his impact was immense. At Cannae, 216 BC, it wasn't just a defeat for Rome, it was annihilation.
Tens of thousands killed. Unmaking legions, as the source puts it.
It's almost unimaginable, and this is where that Roman character, that stubbornness, that gravitas and pietas, really gets tested to the absolute limit.
Explain those terms a bit more, gravitas and pietas.
Sure. Gravitas isn't just being serious. It's this deep sense of dignity, responsibility, discipline that was expected in public life. And pietas, it's often translated as piety, but it's broader. It's duty, reverence, not just to the gods, but critically to your family, your community, and above all, to the Roman state.
So like core values that drove them.
Exactly. Practical guiding principles. Prioritize the state, the collective good, even if it ruins you personally. And Hannibal, even with all his military genius, he couldn't break that spirit. Rome just kept coming back.
For every defeat, she sent more sons.
That's the chilling reality. They absorbed staggering losses but refused to yield. They changed tactics, the Fabian strategy, avoiding direct battles, wearing Hannibal down. And eventually they took the fight to Carthage itself, with Scipio Africanus invading North Africa.
Forcing Hannibal back home.
Right. And ultimately, Carthage fell. Utterly.
And the salting of the earth. That's true.
It's debated by historians whether it literally happened on a massive scale. But the symbolism is powerful and reflects the Roman attitude. The destruction in 146 BC was total. It was about eradication, cursed, forgotten, or meant to be. It shows the absolute ruthlessness of Roman victory when they were pushed that far.
A terrifying message.
And a turning point. After Carthage, Rome was effectively unchallenged in the Western Mediterranean. They were the superpower, no question. And that freed them up to look elsewhere.
Eastward, towards Greece.
Precisely. The Hellenistic kingdoms, the successors to Alexander the Great's empire, Greece itself, the cradle of philosophy, art, democracy.
Now cradled by conquest. Ouch.
Yeah. But this conquest was different from Carthage, wasn't it? Not just destruction.
Right. Our source says they didn't just beat them militarily.
No, it was more complex. It was, in many ways, a cultural absorption, a kind of sophisticated cultural appropriation, you could say.
Rome took her gods, her statues, her language, and called it tribute. That's the line.
Exactly. They genuinely admired Greek culture, the philosophy, the art, the literature, the architecture. They didn't want to destroy it. They wanted to possess it, make it Roman.
So Roman elites started learning Greek, reading Plato.
Absolutely. Greek tutors became highly sought after in Rome. Educated Romans were often bilingual. They immersed themselves in Greek rhetoric, history, philosophy. Roman culture became this synthesis, this blend, carrying forward so much of the Greek legacy.
So they conquered Greece, but in a way, Greece conquered Rome culturally.
That's a classic way of putting it, and there's a lot of truth to it. Rome provided the muscle, the organization, the legal framework, but Greece provided a huge chunk of the intellectual and artistic soul.
Becoming the world, as the source said, not in geography, but in mind.
Yeah, I think that captures it perfectly. Rome's expansion wasn't just about land, it was intellectual, cultural. By integrating Greek learning, they became more than just a military power. They created this unique blend, Roman practicality, their engineering, law, military discipline, combined with Greek sophistication in art, philosophy, rhetoric.
And that blend shaped Western civilization.
Undeniably. It allowed them to govern this vast, diverse empire, not just by force, but through a shared, albeit imposed, legal and cultural framework. It created a kind of universal empire, drawing from the best of both worlds.
Which sounds amazing, powerful, great even. But then our source introduces this idea, greatness as a coin, power on one side.
Tried on the other.
Right. And that sets us up for the next phase, doesn't it? The internal problems, the late Republic starting to fracture?
It really does. And it prompts that crucial question. Does all that power inevitably breed that kind of pride, that arrogance? And is that the beginning of the end?
Yeah.
We definitely see that tension playing out in the late Republic.
How did that manifest? What started going wrong?
Well, think about all the wealth pouring into Rome from these conquests. It created massive economic inequality.
Yeah.
Senators and elites got incredibly rich, buying up huge estates.
While the ordinary soldiers, the farmers who fought the wars.
Exactly. They'd come back after years of service to find their small farms bankrupt or swallowed up by the big landowners. This created a huge population of landless, angry poor people flocking to the city.
Social unrest then.
Big time. Combine that with ambitious generals commanding armies loyal to them personally, not the state, and a political system straining under the weight of managing an empire. The whole dynamic shifts. It becomes less about Rome's collective ambition and more about individual power grabs.
Enter Julius Caesar.
The ultimate example, perhaps. He seems to embody both sides of that coin perfectly.
Yeah.
Undeniable power, immense pride, a brilliant general loved by his troops.
But feared by the Senate.
Deeply feared, because he represented a threat to their power, to the old Republican ways. And his big moment, the point of no return, crossing the Rubicon River with his army.
Which was forbidden, it meant civil war.
Absolutely. He wasn't just a rebel, the source says. He was an omen, a sign of things to come. And his famous line, Alia iacta est.
The die is cast, no turning back.
And it's fascinating how he played a game. He used his military victories, especially in Gaul, to build this intense personal loyalty. His soldiers fought for Caesar.
And Rome was terrified of kings. They'd kicked them out centuries before.
Right. But Caesar was clever. He didn't overtly declare himself king. He sort of offered crowns in his breath, as the source puts it, suggesting it but not grabbing it. He became dictator, technically a temporary emergency office, but he held it repeatedly, effectively making himself dictator for life.
Wow.
A savior in his own mind.
And he did bring changes, reforms.
Oh, definitely. Genuinely transformative ones. The calendar we still use, that's Caesar's reform. He expanded Roman citizenship, launched huge building projects in Rome. He really did reshape things. But all those reforms fundamentally undermined the Republic's power structures. He concentrated incredible authority in himself. He bypassed the Senate when he wanted to. He set the stage for one-man rule.
And so they killed him.
The Ides of March, 44 BC. Stabbed to death in the Senate, ironically beneath a statue of his former rival, Pompey, a tu brute. Whether he actually said it or not, it captures the sense of betrayal.
A desperate attempt to save the Republic.
That's what the assassins like Brutus and Cassius believed. They thought killing the tyrant would restore the old ways.
But our source says, no gods wept that day, only the Republic, but it was too late.
The irony is staggering, isn't it? In killing Caesar, they didn't save the Republic, they doomed it. They unleashed another round of brutal civil wars.
So, was the Republic already dead and Caesar just the final nail? Or did the assassination itself kill it?
That's the million denarius question, isn't it? Historians still debate it. But what's clear from the sources is that his death paved the way for emperors. The power vacuum wasn't filled by a restored Senate, but by a fight to the death between his potential successors.
And his name, Caesar. It becomes more than a name.
It becomes the title for absolute power. Caesar, Kaiser in German, Tsar in Russian, echoes down through centuries, across continents. His legacy wasn't the republic he destroyed, but the imperial age his death ushered in. Rome would never be a republic again.
That's definitive, a total shift.
The civil wars made sure of that. The old system, with its checks and balances, flawed as it was, just couldn't be put back together. The only way forward seemed to be a single, strong ruler.
And the man who emerged from that chaos wasn't maybe who you'd expect initially. Not Mark Antony, but Caesar's young heir, Octavian.
Right, later known as Augustus. And his rise, as the source suggests, felt different. Left naked ambition like Caesar, more. Managing the aftermath, picking up the pieces.
Gathering the scattered bones of a broken order and weaving them into something new. An empire crowned in peace but veiled in power.
He was a political genius, Augustus. Absolutely brilliant. He created this masterpiece of illusion, really. He made it look like he was restoring the Republic, respecting tradition.
While actually concentrating all the power in his own hands.
Precisely. He avoided titles like king or dictator. He called himself Princeps First Citizen, very modest. He supposedly gave power back to the Senate.
Did he?
Not really. He wore modesty like a mask, as the source says. The Senate bowed beneath it. He controlled the armies, the finances, the key provinces. He held multiple traditional offices simultaneously. It was autocratic rule, cleverly disguised as Republican restoration. A masterclass.
And under his rule, Rome transformed physically too.
Oh, massively. Marble replaced mud is the famous quote associated with his reign. Laws were codified, standardized, roads built everywhere connected the empire. Temples went up all over Rome. It really did become a golden age, aesthetically and structurally.
And this is the era of the Pax Romana, the Roman peace.
Yes. But again, the source gives that crucial clarification, not as absence of war, but as silence imposed.
What does that mean, silence imposed?
It means this peace, this stability, incredible as it was, wasn't necessarily achieved through harmony or agreement. It was enforced by Rome's overwhelming military might. Augustus commanded a huge standing army, nearly 300,000 men.
Wow.
Yeah, and an efficient, centralized bureaucracy. So, trade flourished, yes. Legions kept order within the borders, mostly. The empire functioned smoothly under Roman law. But it was peace on Rome's terms. Stability enforced by an iron fist and a velvet glove.
So it was a good time to be Roman, probably, if you stayed in line.
For many, yes. Unprecedented prosperity, security across a vast area, huge infrastructure improvements, cultural flourishing. But it raises that question, doesn't it? Is peace truly peace if it's imposed by force?
That silence-imposed phrase definitely has an unsettling edge to it. It hints at what's underneath.
It does. It points to the authoritarian foundation. While it brought stability, it relied entirely on that central power, ultimately on the emperor. And that system, brilliant as Augustus made it seem, contained the seeds of its own vulnerability, that unchecked power in one person.
And that brings us to the shadow. The source says it lengthens with the sun. The seed of decline is sown right there at the summit.
Power, once taken, is never satisfied. What Augustus built with vision, his successors, well, some of them, fractured through vanity, or worse.
It's such a classic story, isn't it? The height of power contains the beginning of the fall.
It really suggests that success itself, if you don't manage it wisely, can create the conditions for decline. And at this stage, the biggest threat wasn't external enemies banging at the gates. It was internal rot.
The concentration of power that Augustus managed so carefully became a disaster in the wrong hands.
Exactly. The vision got lost, replaced by the whims, the paranoia, the sheer indulgence of later emperors, and that started to erode the very foundations of the Pax Romana.
And the sources give some pretty wild examples. Emperor Tiberius ruling from his island, suspicious of everyone, ordering executions.
Drunk on suspicion, yeah. Retreating from Rome, letting his officials run things, often brutally. Then Caligula. I mean, madness made flesh, the source calls him.
Naming his horse a consul, did that really happen?
It's one of those stories that might be exaggerated by hostile sources later, but it perfectly captures the perception of his absolute disregard for tradition and sanity. Whether literal or not, it shows how unhinged his rule appeared. Rome, once led by heroes, now whimpered under tyrants.
And Nero, the fiddle while Rome burned.
Another iconic image. He almost certainly didn't fiddle. That's likely a later embellishment. But Rome did burn catastrophically in 64 AD, and Nero did seize the opportunity to build himself a lavish palace, the Domus Aurea, on the cleared land. And he did blame the Christians, scapegoating them and initiating horrific persecutions.
So power-bred cruelty, pleasure turned into perversion.
It seems that way for some. The absolute unchecked power corrupted absolutely in certain cases. It led to paranoia, cruelty often born of insecurity, and this relentless pursuit of pleasure and spectacle that drained the treasury and undermined any sense of public morality or duty.
It's just hard to fathom how the empire kept going with leaders like that. What did it do to the rest of the system?
It corroded everything. The sources talk about the empire choking on its own gold. Wealth became a source of corruption, not just strength. Economically, you had these huge disparities. Emperors spending fortunes, while ordinary people struggled. Later, emperors started debasing the currency to pay the army, leading to inflation.
And politically, the Senate.
Once mighty, now largely powerless. Reduced to rubber-stamping the emperor's decisions or living in fear of his displeasure, it lost its authority, its credibility.
And the army, the legions.
This is critical. Loyalty shifted. Instead of being loyal to the state, to Rome, legions increasingly became loyal to their generals, the ones who paid them, who promised them bonuses. Generals started using their armies to seize power themselves.
Selling loyalty to the highest bidder.
Yeah.
Leading to civil wars.
Exactly. Which became almost endemic in later periods.
And the ordinary people, what about them?
Bred in circuses. Panem et circenses. Keep them fed, keep them entertained with gladiatorial games and chariot races, and hopefully they won't notice the collapsing political system or their own lack of real power. Appeased, but not inspired. Fed, but not led.
So it really was a systemic failure. Political rot, economic strain, military disloyalty, even the spirit of the people kind of withered. The cracks were forming from the inside out.
Absolutely. This raises that fundamental question about the social contract. What happens when the bond between rulers and ruled just breaks down? Bread and circuses was a band-aid, a distraction, but it eroded the civic virtue, that sense of participation and duty that had made Rome strong in the first place. People became passive spectators.
Dependent, apathetic.
Yeah, and that apathy, that loss of civic connection, makes the whole structure incredibly fragile. So Rome endured, yes, for quite a while longer, but beneath that marble mask, the cracks were spreading. The rot was internal. The center trembled, and eventually the edges started to burn.
The empire, too vast to hold, straining beneath its own glory.
That's a powerful way to put it. The sheer size became a liability.
And those edges, the borders, they started bleeding, didn't they? The Rhine, the Danube rivers that were once the backbone of Roman defense.
Now they were bending. Under the pressure of what the Romans called barbarian waves, constant incursions.
Who were these barbarians? Were they just destructive hordes?
That's the Roman perspective often. But our sources hinted something more complex. The Goths, the Franks, the Vandals. They weren't monsters. They were peoples on the move, often driven by their own pressures, hunger, climate change, or being pushed by other groups, like the Huns arriving from Central Asia.
So migrations, really, as much as invasions.
In many cases, yes. They were seeking land, security, sometimes even integration into the empire initially. But Rome's internal weakness, its inability to effectively manage its borders, defend them consistently, or integrate these groups successfully, that turned pressure into crisis.
The legions couldn't hold them back anymore.
The legions that once marched in pride now fled in dust, as the source says. There were still Roman victories, periods of recovery, but the overall trend was decline. Rome was increasingly on the defensive, no longer conquering, sometimes reduced to begging for truces, paying off tribes, or hiring them as mercenaries, which often backfired.
The Battle of Adrianople, that was a big one.
Huge. 378 AD, a Roman emperor, Valens, killed, and a whole Roman army smashed by the Goths. It was a massive psychological blow. It showed the world, and the Romans themselves, that the legions weren't invincible anymore.
It's such a reversal, from the devouring beast of the early days to an empire begging for mercy. These weren't just random attacks, though. They were symptoms of the deeper rot.
Absolutely. The military was overstretched, exhausted by internal civil wars as much as external threats. Resources were dwindling due to economic collapse. The logistics of defending thousands of miles of frontier were overwhelming. The external pressures were just exploiting the internal decay that had been building for generations.
And that internal decay just accelerated, didn't it? Especially the leadership crisis.
Oh, completely. That period called the crisis of the 3rd century was just chaos. Emperors rising and falling like dominoes.
Some ruling for just days.
Literally. Assassinations, military coups. It was constant turmoil. Something like 20-plus emperors in 50 years. Civil war wasn't an event. It became, as the source says, a ritual. Brother against brother, general against general, everyone grabbing for the throne, the purple.
How could anything function?
It barely did. This relentless instability made any kind of consistent governance impossible, which, of course, made the economic problems even worse. It was a death spiral.
The source says even the air changed. Law replaced by bribes. Vision replaced by fear.
It captures that complete breakdown of trust, of order, of shared purpose. Corruption became endemic. Paranoia was rampant. Loyalty meant nothing beyond the next potential payday or threat. The whole social fabric was fraying.
And the economy just collapsed.
Pretty much paralyzed in the West. Constant war destroyed trade routes, disrupted farming. Taxes became unbearable, crushing farmers who often abandoned their land.
Which meant less food, less revenue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The government kept debasing the coinage, mixing in cheaper metals to pay soldiers, which caused runaway inflation. Money became worthless. People reverted to barter in some areas. Gold flowed east toward the more stable Eastern Empire was just hoarded. In the West, only shadows, as the source puts it. Economic darkness.
The complete breakdown. How could it survive?
In the West, ultimately, it couldn't. That combination of political chaos, economic collapse, military weakness, and social apathy, it was fatal. The loss of trust, the loss of vision, it paralyzed any real chance of recovery. The Eternal City started to forget itself, losing its identity, its purpose. It just strained until it broke.
And the fall itself. Maybe the most surprising thing is how anticlimactic it was. Not thunder, but a whisper.
Yeah, that's a really insightful point from the sources. It wasn't one single dramatic event like a movie climax. It was this quiet decay of certainty, a slow crumbling.
And that word again, forgetting. It wasn't just defeated, forgot what it was.
It implies that loss of identity, doesn't it? Forgetting what made Rome great, what held it together. It wasn't just military defeat. It was a kind of societal amnesia that undermined its very reason for being. The fall was the culmination of centuries of internal problems finally meeting external pressures it could no longer withstand.
So, the symbolic end. 476 AD, a boy emperor named Romulus Augustulus, the irony of the names, Romulus like the founder.
Little Augustus, almost.
Right, stripped of his crown, not by a rival Roman general, but by a barbarian commander, Odoacer, who wore no laurel wreath, only hunger.
And crucially, Odoacer didn't claim the title of emperor for himself. He sent the imperial insignia back to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople, basically saying, we don't need an emperor in the West anymore.
So no final battle, no last stand.
Not really, just hush, a quiet ending. A silence sweeping through the forum, the Senate halls, the places that once pulsed with power. The Western Empire fell, as the source says, not with fire, but with forgetting.
It's almost heartbreaking, such a colossal thing just fading out.
It underscores how internal the collapse really was. The empire was hollowed out, the institutions were shells, the spirit was gone. The barbarians were just pushing on an open door, in many ways.
But crucially, you mentioned the East.
Yes, absolutely crucial. While the West collapsed into various successor kingdoms ruled by Germanic tribes, the Eastern Roman Empire, centered on Constantinople, Byzantium continued. For another 1,000 years.
1,000 years.
Yeah. Preserving Roman law, Greek culture, Christian tradition. It evolved, certainly, became more Greek and Orthodox Christian, but it saw itself as the continuation of Rome. So Rome didn't entirely vanish in 476. It fractured, shifted its center.
Okay, so bringing this all together, what does it mean for us? The physical empire in the West is gone, but its presence, it's still here, isn't it?
Oh, undeniably. The source puts it beautifully. And yet, Rome did not die. She fractured, she faded, she became myth.
But more than myth, right?
Much more. In Constantinople, that echo lasted for centuries, preserving so much knowledge. In the ruins scattered across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, the aqueducts, the arenas, the roads, her bones still speak. You can touch the physical remnants.
And the less tangible stuff.
It's everywhere. Our laws, so much Western legal tradition goes back to Roman law. Our languages, Latin is the root of French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, and hugely influenced English. Our ideas about government, citizenship, republicanism, empire itself, the architecture, engineering principles, Rome endures, not as a ruling empire, but as a ghost, a memory, a foundation.
Woven into the fabric of our world.
Deeply woven.
So we walk where she walked, we fall as she fell, we dream as she dared. It's quite profound. Ashes do not vanish, they settle, they whisper. In Rome, she whispers still.
It leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? What can this whole epic journey from that savage cradle to a whispering ghost teach us today? About power, its cycles, how fragile even the greatest human achievements can be.
And about the endurance of ideas, ambition.
Yeah. And maybe most importantly, how do we stop our own certainties, the things we take for granted in our own societies, from quietly decaying? Are we listening for the whispers? What are the quiet decays of certainty in our world right now that maybe we're overlooking, just like the Romans might have overlooked theirs?